When 16-year-old Danielle Carter transferred from the gritty streets of Detroit to the elite Meadow Ridge High, she hoped for a fresh start. Instead, she walked into a silent warzone where her skin color, background, and quiet demeanor painted a target on her back. They laughed. They whispered. And one day, in front of an entire classroom, they cut off her braid, a braid she had spent hours weaving, a symbol of her strength and culture, while the teacher pretended not to notice. But instead of breaking, Danielle did something no one expected. She fought back, not just with her fists, but with her words, her truth, and her unshakable will to be seen and respected. What followed was a battle against wealth, privilege, and a school system built to protect the powerful. Stick with us to the end to see how one girl changed an entire institution. And if this story moves you, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and share your thoughts below. Danielle Carter stood silently beside her mother's aging Honda Accord, the early morning chill biting through her thin red hoodie. The car had just rolled to a stop outside Meadow Ridge High School, and Danielle stared up at the grand marble steps and expansive glass entrance of the building. The words, Meadow Ridge High, Excellence Through Community, gleamed proudly above the doorway, but to Danielle, they felt more like a warning than a welcome. Her mother, Teresa Carter, remained quiet, both hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. "Let's go," she finally said, her voice clipped, eyes locked on the rearview mirror. "Don't let them think I didn't raise you right." There was no hug. No good luck. Not even a glance. Danielle nodded and stepped out, the car door shutting behind her with a heavy finality that echoed in her chest. As she crossed the front courtyard filled with clusters of laughing students in designer jackets and sparkly backpacks, her presence felt like a record scratch in the rhythm of their world. Heads turned. Whispers floated. A few snickers. She knew what they saw, a black girl from Detroit wearing thrift store jeans, braids tightly woven, eyes quiet but alert. She didn't look like she belonged at a school where Teslas lined the student parking lot. Inside, the contrast was even starker. The hallways were pristine, polished to a shine that made Danielle feel like she was walking through a showroom. The lockers were color-coded, the bulletin boards immaculately arranged, and even the scent in the air, a blend of lemon disinfectant and fresh copier paper, screamed order and perfection. Her old school back in Detroit had metal detectors at the entrance and peeling paint on the walls. But at least there, no one acted like she was invisible. Danielle's homeroom teacher, Mrs. Kendricks, greeted her with a forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome, Danielle. I've heard you're a very strong student." The emphasis on the word strong made Danielle stiffen. It wasn't a compliment, it was code. She took the last seat in the back, the stares of her classmates burning into her back like hot coals. No one said hello. No one asked her name. At lunch, things got worse. Danielle stood at the edge of the cafeteria, tray in hand, scanning for a seat. She spotted an open spot near a window and headed toward it, but a tall blonde girl slid into it just before she arrived. The girl didn't say a word, just looked up at Danielle with a smile that dripped sarcasm. Danielle turned and settled into a table near the trash cans, alone. That's when she first saw them. Austin Rell, the golden boy of Meadow Ridge. Captain of the lacrosse team, son of one of the school's top donors, and a walking embodiment of privilege. His smirk had the sharpness of someone who had never been told no. Beside him stood Kyle Foster, lanky and smug, and behind them was Brianna Hartley, a heavy-set girl with a sharp tongue and eyes full of resentment. Danielle locked eyes with Austin, refusing to look away. He raised an eyebrow, amused. Brianna muttered something to Kyle, who laughed too loudly. It was clear from the moment they laid eyes on her, Danielle had been marked. Over the next few days, the small cruelties began to pile up. Snide comments about where she must be from, whispers when she raised her hand in class, and an English teacher who suddenly stopped calling on her altogether. Kyle, accidentally, bumped into her 3 times in the hallway, each time offering a fake apology. "Didn't see you there," he'd say with a smirk, knowing full well what he was doing. Brianna, oddly enough, had once been a target of ridicule herself, mocked for her weight and lack of style. But instead of empathy, she had embraced cruelty. It was easier to blend in with the powerful than to stand alone. Danielle became her perfect target, a way for Brianna to secure her place among the popular kids. She'd sniff the air dramatically when Danielle entered a room, whispering, "Smells like the ghetto in here," drawing laughter from nearby students. Danielle kept her head down. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was armor. Back in Detroit, she'd learned that reacting only gave the bullies more ammunition. She had grown up fighting battles no one saw, facing eviction notices, gunshots at night, and a broken family dynamic that left her hardened long before she should have been. A few snobs with designer clothes. She could handle that. Until the scissors. It happened during third period art class. Danielle was sketching quietly at her desk in the back of the room. The sunlight streamed through the large windows, catching the shine of her freshly done braids, sleek, long, and symbolic of her culture, her identity, her pride. Behind her, Brianna leaned in, whispering something Danielle didn't catch. Then came a soft metallic sound, a snip. A thick braid dropped onto Danielle's desk. The room fell into stunned silence. Danielle didn't move. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply stared at the braid, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. Behind her, Brianna laughed nervously. "Oh no, it was an accident," she said, holding the scissors like a trophy. Austin chuckled, feigning surprise. Kyle covered his mouth in mock horror. The teacher looked up, confused, then pretended not to understand what had happened. Danielle stood up slowly, picked up the severed braid, and walked out of the classroom without a word. The hallway outside was quiet, the tile cool beneath her shoes. Her steps echoed. She stopped at her locker, placed the braid gently inside her backpack, and stared ahead, a wave of emotion washing over her, humiliation, rage, sadness, all boiling together. That afternoon, as she waited for her bus in the chilly shade of the school courtyard, Principal Darnell Hughes approached her. He was a tall, sharply dressed black man in his late 40s, the only person in authority who had even acknowledged her existence since she arrived. "Danielle, are you all right?" he asked, his voice low but sincere. Danielle hesitated before nodding. "Yes, sir. I'm fine." "No, you're not," he said gently. "And you don't have to pretend to be strong around me. I've seen this happen before. But silence doesn't fix it, it just gives them permission to keep going." Her throat tightened. "What's the point of speaking up? No one's going to believe me. They're the ones with the power." "I believe you," Principal Hughes said firmly. "But more importantly, I need you to believe that your voice matters. That your dignity is not up for debate." For the first time since stepping foot on Meadow Ridge's campus, Danielle felt something other than fear. She felt seen. The next day, Danielle found a small notebook in her locker. Inside was a note in neat handwriting: "Start writing everything down. Every comment. Every action. Every time they make you feel less than who you are. We'll build from the truth." She began to write. Each page became a testament. A record of the daily slights, the sideways glances, the laughter that followed her through hallways. She documented how teachers ignored her hand, how Brianna mocked her clothes, how Kyle jostled her in the hallway. She wrote about the braid, how it felt to hold it in her hands, to see it lying on her desk like a piece of her identity someone else had claimed the right to destroy. Principal Hughes, meanwhile, was quietly gathering his own evidence. He reviewed hallway footage. He asked the janitor, Reggie, a quiet, kind black man who worked the night shift, what he'd seen. Reggie hesitated at first, fearful for his job. But when Hughes promised to protect him, Reggie confessed. He had seen the whole thing, heard Brianna and Kyle planning it in hushed voices, had seen Brianna raise the scissors. Danielle had allies now. Not many, but enough. Then came the phone call. A reporter named Lena Mercer reached out, having heard whispers about the scandal brewing at Meadow Ridge. She asked Danielle to share her story, on record. Danielle agreed. 2 days later, an article titled, "A Voice from the Silence, The Pain of a Black Student at Meadow Ridge High," hit the local news circuit. The piece went viral. Thousands read it. Hundreds commented. Parents, alumni, and former students began to come forward, exposing a long history of racism, favoritism, and cruelty that had been swept under the polished floors of Meadow Ridge for decades. Suddenly, the story wasn't just Danielle's. It was everyone's. And Meadow Ridge High was about to change forever. The day after the article went viral, Meadow Ridge High was no longer the same quiet, insulated world Danielle Carter had first stepped into. Whispers spread through the hallways like wildfire. Teachers glanced nervously at their students, administrators huddled in private meetings, and the students who had once laughed so freely now avoided eye contact as Danielle passed by. Danielle walked through the halls with her shoulders square, her chin lifted just slightly higher than before. She didn't smile. She didn't speak unless spoken to. But her presence was no longer ignored. She had become something different, not just a new girl from Detroit, but a symbol of something larger, something many had never dared speak aloud. The article had struck a nerve, especially because it hadn't been filled with anger or blame. Lena Mercer had written it with clarity and compassion, highlighting Danielle's pain but also her resilience. She included Reggie's testimony and Principal Hugh's efforts to gather the truth. It painted a picture not only of bullying, but of a culture of silence and fear. People outside the school began asking questions. Local news anchors picked up the story. A segment aired on the evening news. And then the responses started pouring in. Danielle's inbox filled with messages, some from former Meadow Ridge students who apologized for staying quiet during their own time there, others from complete strangers across the country. Parents wrote to say how proud they were of her courage. Teachers from other schools sent messages encouraging her to keep speaking up. But perhaps most moving were the notes from students currently at Meadow Ridge who had suffered in silence too, quiet kids, new transfers, students of color who had never dared raise their voices. "I never thought anyone would understand," one girl wrote anonymously. "You made me believe maybe I'm not crazy for feeling out of place." Despite the support, the days that followed were far from easy. Brianna Hartley didn't return to school after the article was published. Rumors swirled, some said her parents had withdrawn her voluntarily, others claimed she was too afraid to face the backlash. Whatever the reason, her absence was loud. The girl who once ruled the cafeteria with her sarcasm and cutting glances had vanished. Kyle Foster kept his distance, no longer making accidental bumps in the hallway. He sat quietly in class, looking smaller than before. But Austin Rell, he was different. He didn't speak a word to Danielle, but his gaze lingered. Watching. Waiting. Still calculating. He had grown up being told he was untouchable. Now, for the first time, his world was cracking. Principal Hughes wasted no time. He called an emergency faculty meeting, instructing teachers to acknowledge and address bullying head-on. "We can't pretend this didn't happen," he said, standing at the front of the teachers' lounge. "Our silence is part of the problem. And if we continue to ignore it, we're just as guilty." Some teachers nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable, their loyalty to the school's old ways running deep. Outside of school hours, Danielle kept writing. Her notebook, once filled with records of insults, now also carried names of allies. She began noting kind words, small acts of support, even nods from students who previously ignored her. These were the first signs of something shifting, slowly, but surely. Then, something unexpected happened. Jessica Williams, a senior known for her quiet presence and flawless academic record, posted a long message on her social media account. She described how Brianna had once been the target of cruel jokes about her weight and awkwardness during her freshman year. But instead of rising above it, Jessica wrote, Brianna decided it was easier to become what she hated. She used pain as a weapon. And Danielle became her scapegoat. Jessica's post went viral among students. Other stories emerged, one after another. Students who had witnessed Brianna mock others. Kids who had stayed silent when Kyle spread rumors. Former friends of Austin who admitted they had been afraid to challenge him. The dam had broken. Lena Mercer reached out again. She planned a follow-up article, this time focusing not just on Danielle, but on the school's deeper cultural issues. She interviewed more students, parents, and even Reggie, who had grown more confident since coming forward. Principal Hughes gave a quote too. "This isn't just about one student. It's about all of us. About choosing to do the right thing, even when it's uncomfortable." Danielle found herself at the center of it all. She wasn't just a student anymore, she had become a voice. And with that came weight. The pressure began to mount from all sides. Some students accused her of making the school look bad. Others muttered about her, enjoying the attention. A group of parents, including the Rell and Foster families, demanded a formal review of the article's claims. Danielle overheard someone say in the hallway, "I miss when we didn't have to walk on eggshells." But she didn't flinch. Principal Hughes called her into his office one afternoon, offering her a glass of orange juice as she sat down. "How are you holding up?" he asked. Danielle gave a tired smile. "I'm okay. I guess." "You've done something important," he said. "But it's also exhausting, I know. Speaking truth always comes at a cost. But the good news is, you're not alone anymore." He showed her a folder. Inside were printed testimonials from students and staff. Some were anonymous. Some signed their names. All supported her. And more than that, some called for change. "This is what gives us power," he said, tapping the folder. "Voices. Stories. Truth." That week, the school board scheduled an emergency meeting. Parents were invited. Press was expected. The school's reputation was on the line. The administration feared lawsuits. Principal Hughes was under pressure to restore calm. But he had no intention of sweeping anything under the rug. The night before the meeting, Danielle sat at her small desk at home, flipping through her notebook. On one page was a scrawled sentence she had written the night after Brianna cut her braid, "They think they can take what makes me me." She tore that page out and tucked it into her pocket. The next morning, the school auditorium was packed. Teachers. Parents. Students. Reporters with cameras lining the back wall. The superintendent stood at the podium, nervous and tight-lipped. Behind him sat the school board members. Beside them, surprisingly, sat Principal Hughes, and next to him, Danielle Carter. She hadn't planned to speak. But when the superintendent fumbled through a vague, lukewarm apology, murmurs spread through the crowd. It wasn't enough. Then Principal Hughes stood. "We owe this community more than apologies," he said. "We owe them action. Transparency. And above all, accountability. I'd like to invite Danielle Carter to speak." Gasps echoed. All eyes turned to her. Danielle stood slowly. She walked to the podium, clutching the torn notebook page in her hand. She didn't have a speech prepared. She didn't need one. "My name is Danielle Carter," she began, her voice steady. "And I was bullied at this school, not just by students, but by silence. By teachers who looked the other way. By a culture that protected wealth and punished difference." She held up the page. This was me. Thinking they had the right to cut off my hair. My identity. My pride. But you know what? They didn't take anything. I'm still here. And now I'm speaking not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. Her words hung in the air. I don't want pity. I want responsibility. I want this school to finally live up to its motto, excellence through community. Because a real community protects its own. The room erupted in applause. Not polite clapping, but something real. Raw. A wave of solidarity that had been waiting to rise. That day, the school board voted to launch an internal review. An independent firm was brought in to evaluate Meadow Ridge's disciplinary policies, diversity training, and reporting protocols. Brianna and Kyle were officially suspended pending further investigation. Austin was stripped of all leadership positions and placed on probation. But more importantly, something fundamental shifted. Danielle didn't smile walking home that afternoon. But she did feel something new. Not relief, not joy, something deeper. Dignity. She hadn't just endured. She had transformed pain into power. She knew there was still more to do. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she was doing it alone. And that made all the difference. The Monday following the school board's emergency meeting, the atmosphere at Meadow Ridge High was electric with whispers and speculation. Posters announcing a new Equity and Inclusion Committee began appearing across the campus, and teachers were asked to begin each class with a brief reflection on kindness and community. Though the initiatives felt sudden and slightly performative to some, for Danielle Carter, it was a tangible sign that her voice had sparked real change. Still, not everyone was ready to embrace the shift. As Danielle walked through the school's main hallway, she noticed subtle signs of resistance. A few students still whispered behind her back. Some rolled their eyes at the posters. And while Kyle Foster and Brianna Hartley remained suspended, their absence seemed to stoke resentment among the wealthier families who believed the school had overreacted. Danielle overheard one student mutter in the locker room, "I guess now we all gotta tiptoe around Little Miss Detroit." But she no longer felt the sting of their words. Instead, she channeled it. Every glare, every side comment became a silent fuel pushing her forward. During lunch one afternoon, she sat alone by the window in the cafeteria, her usual spot, when a girl named Tessa slid into the seat across from her. Tessa was soft-spoken, always buried in a book, and rarely involved in school drama. "I just wanted to say thank you," Tessa said quietly, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sandwich wrapper. "My brother used to go here. He dropped out junior year because of stuff like what you went through. No one ever stood up like you did." Danielle blinked, touched by the honesty. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "It means a lot." Word of Danielle's quiet strength and her unwavering dignity continued to ripple outward. Principal Hughes approached her that same week with an idea. "We're creating a peer leadership group, students who can act as advocates, help mediate conflicts, and be a resource for anyone facing bullying or discrimination. I want you to lead it." Danielle hesitated. "Me?" "Yes," Hughes said with a firm nod. "You've already been doing the work. This just gives it structure." The first meeting of the Student Advocacy Council took place in the library, inside the glass-walled reading room. 5 students showed up, Tessa among them. There was also Jamal, a transfer student from Atlanta, Chloe, a senior who used to be close with Brianna but had grown disillusioned, and 2 freshmen, Mateo and Grace, both quiet and nervous. Danielle looked around at them and felt something shift again. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was a movement taking root. In the weeks that followed, the group began hosting open forums after school where students could share their experiences anonymously or aloud. They created a submission box for reporting discrimination or bullying without fear. Teachers started showing up to the forums too, some cautiously, others curiously. At one of the sessions, an unexpected figure appeared, Austin Rell. He didn't speak. He sat in the back, arms crossed, baseball cap pulled low. But Danielle saw him. And though she didn't call him out, she made sure to lock eyes with him as she spoke about complicity and silence. Sometimes the most dangerous thing, she told the group, isn't what someone says or does to you. It's the person who watches it happen and chooses to do nothing. That silence tells you everything you need to know. Austin didn't flinch. But he didn't look away either. That night, Danielle found a folded note in her locker. No name. Just a short message scribbled in small, neat handwriting. I see it now. You were right. Danielle didn't need a signature to know who it was from. Meanwhile, Principal Hughes continued working behind the scenes to ensure accountability remained a permanent part of Meadow Ridge's culture. He invited Danielle to a staff meeting, an unprecedented move, and asked her to speak to the teachers. When she stood before them, many looked uneasy. These were adults who had failed to protect her. Some had avoided her gaze since the article. Others were clearly grappling with guilt. I'm not here to shame anyone, Danielle began, her voice clear and steady. But I am here to remind you of something important. What happens in your classroom doesn't end at the bell. It follows students home. It stays with them. And when you ignore injustice, whether out of fear or indifference, you become part of it. There was a long silence when she finished. And then, surprisingly, Mrs. Kaplan, the English teacher who had once refused to call on her, stood up and said, "You're right. I failed you. I'm sorry. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't performative. It was real." And Danielle nodded in silent acknowledgement. As the school began embracing change, the broader community took notice. Lena Mercer wrote a third follow-up piece, this time highlighting the ongoing transformation at Meadow Ridge. The headline read, "From Silence to Strength, How One Student Sparked a Movement." The story included photos from the Student Advocacy Council's meetings, quotes from teachers who had changed their approach, and even a short interview with Reggie, who was now training other staff on how to recognize and intervene in harassment. But perhaps the most powerful section of the article was Lena's closing line. Danielle Carter didn't just find her voice, she gave one to a generation of students too afraid to speak. At home, Danielle kept to her routines. She still trained at the neighborhood boxing gym twice a week. Not to fight, but to stay grounded. The rhythm of her footwork, the familiar sound of gloves against pads, it gave her peace. Her mother, who had once struggled to understand Danielle's quiet strength, had begun attending community forums at the school. They talked more now. Laughed even. There were still silences between them, but they no longer felt like walls. One Friday morning, Principal Hughes surprised Danielle with an announcement over the intercom. "This year, we're introducing a new honor, the Courage in Community Award. It goes to a student who has exemplified integrity, bravery, and the pursuit of justice. Our first recipient, Danielle Carter." The applause that followed wasn't obligatory. It wasn't slow or polite. It was thunderous. And that afternoon, as Danielle stood on stage to accept the award, she looked out at her classmates, some tearful, some clapping with pride, and some simply listening, and she smiled. Not because she needed their validation, but because she had finally witnessed something she never thought she'd see, a school once built on hierarchy and exclusion becoming a place where dignity and compassion mattered more. That evening, Danielle returned to the quiet room where her journey had started. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk and gently lifted the box that held the braid Brianna had cut from her head. She no longer looked at it with sorrow. Now it was a symbol. Not of what was taken from her, but of what she had reclaimed. And as she traced her fingers across the dark strands, she whispered softly to herself, "This is who I am. And no one gets to take that away from me ever again." In that moment, surrounded by quiet and memory and triumph, Danielle Carter knew that her story was no longer just her own. It belonged to every student who had ever been silenced. And now, finally, they had someone showing them how to rise. In the days following her acceptance of the Courage in Community Award, Danielle Carter's story continued to ripple through the broader community. What had started as a silent battle inside the walls of Meadow Ridge High had now become a catalyst for deeper conversations across town, in churches, local cafes, school board meetings, and even dinner tables. Danielle, however, was not caught up in the attention. She remained focused, aware that lasting change wasn't measured by applause, but by how people acted when no one was watching. With the support of Principal Hughes and the Student Advocacy Council, she began developing a workshop series for younger students in the district, workshops that centered on self-worth, peer empathy, and the long-term impact of bullying. "I want to reach kids before the damage happens," Danielle explained to Principal Hughes during one of their planning meetings. "Before someone becomes a Brianna or an Austin. Or worse, before someone becomes invisible like I almost did." Hughes nodded. "Then we start with the middle school. I'll make the calls." Word of the initiative quickly caught the attention of the Meadow Ridge School Board. Superintendent Eliza Franklin, a former teacher with a reputation for reform, personally invited Danielle to speak at an upcoming district leadership summit. The event would include educators from across the county and beyond. Danielle was hesitant at first. Speaking in front of students was one thing, they lived it. But a room full of adults? Administrators? That was different. What if they don't take me seriously? Danielle asked Lena Mercer, the reporter who had chronicled her journey. Lena smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Danielle, they've already read your story. You changed an entire school with your voice. Don't ever doubt its power." On the morning of the summit, Danielle stood backstage at the County Civic Auditorium, dressed in a navy blazer and dark jeans. The lights felt overwhelming, and the murmur of hundreds of attendees sent nervous jitters through her. But as she stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. She began slowly, her voice soft but steady. "My name is Danielle Carter. And for a long time, I was invisible." She spoke of her first day at Meadow Ridge High, the quiet mockery, the cold shoulders, the day her braid was cut. She talked about Principal Hughes, about Mr. Reggie, and about standing up not just for herself, but for those too scared to speak. And then, she paused. "But today isn't about my pain," she said. "It's about how we stop pretending schools are immune to cruelty. It's about recognizing that discipline isn't the solution, culture is. And culture starts with what we allow, what we ignore, and what we encourage." Her closing words lingered in the air, "We don't need more punishment. We need more courage. The kind that steps in. The kind that stands up. The kind that makes sure no one feels alone." The standing ovation that followed wasn't just respectful, it was emotional. Later that evening, Danielle received a call from a nearby community center in South Detroit. They had read about her story, watched her summit speech, and were hoping she would consider helping them launch a youth mentorship program. Danielle said yes. Meanwhile, at Meadow Ridge, a subtle but powerful transformation was underway. Students began challenging the cliques that once ruled the cafeteria. Former bystanders were stepping in when they saw someone being targeted. Even teachers held one another accountable. Austin Rell, now stripped of his leadership roles and sitting quietly in the back of classrooms, had become noticeably different. He still kept to himself, but there was no more smirking. One afternoon, he asked to speak to Danielle in private. They met in the library. The same one where she had once hidden between bookshelves to escape stares. "I know you don't owe me anything," Austin began, eyes cast downward. "But I need to say it. I was wrong. I let everyone believe it was okay to treat you that way. And then I stood back and watched it happen." Danielle didn't interrupt. She let him speak. "I thought power meant people feared you. But watching you, what you did, that was real strength. I'm sorry, Danielle. I really am." She nodded, not out of forgiveness, but acknowledgement. "I hope you use your second chance wisely, Austin. Not everyone gets one." The next day, Austin showed up at a Student Advocacy Council meeting. He didn't speak. He just listened. But his presence alone shifted the atmosphere in the room. Brianna, on the other hand, had taken a different path. After transferring to another school, rumors floated around about her isolation and difficulty adjusting. But one day, Danielle received a letter in the mail, no return address. The handwriting was shaky. Danielle. I don't know if I have the right to ask for your time. But I read the article. I saw the speech. And I'm not proud of who I became. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to understand myself better now. I've started counseling. Maybe one day I'll get to be someone better. Thank you for being stronger than I ever was. Brianna. Danielle sat with the letter for a long time. It was a reminder of the complicated layers of pain people carried, and the different ways they chose to handle it. Spring brought new growth to Meadow Ridge. The school hosted its first Diversity and Inclusion Festival, with booths representing dozens of cultures, student performances, and a keynote address by Danielle. Reggie, now promoted to facilities liaison with the district, walked beside her during the festival, beaming with pride. Never thought I'd see this place like this, he said. Danielle smiled. Neither did I. As graduation approached, Danielle received an acceptance letter from the University of Michigan, with a scholarship tied to her community work. She would major in social justice education. On the day of the graduation ceremony, Principal Hughes pulled her aside. No matter where life takes you, Danielle, he said, never forget what you built here. You weren't just a student. You were a cornerstone. Danielle hugged him, tears brimming in her eyes. As she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, the applause was thunderous once again. But this time, it wasn't because she was a symbol. It was because she was Danielle, and everyone knew who she really was. That evening, she returned home, placed her diploma beside the wooden box containing the braid, and whispered, "We did it." Her journey wasn't over. But the chapter that once began with silence had ended with a voice so powerful, it changed an entire school, a community, and perhaps a generation. Spring arrived at Meadow Ridge High with a new energy. The school that once held its silence like a badge of pride now buzzed with conversations about change, accountability, and growth. Hallway bulletin boards displayed student artwork inspired by social justice. Teachers integrated empathy and ethics into lessons, and the Student Advocacy Council, led by Danielle Carter, began mentoring younger students across grades. But as the school began to blossom outwardly, Danielle knew the work wasn't done. The hardest part was never starting the change, it was maintaining it. And now, with graduation just 2 months away, she found herself balancing hope with vigilance. The system had been stirred, but it hadn't been completely rebuilt. One morning, Principal Hughes called Danielle into his office. The sunlight filtered softly through the blinds, casting lines of gold across his mahogany desk. "I've been invited to speak at the National Education Equity Forum in Chicago this June," he began, sliding an envelope toward her. "And I'm not going alone. They want you to speak too." Danielle stared at the letter, her fingers frozen mid-reach. "Me? You," Hughes said with a warm smile. "They want to hear from the person who lived it. Not just someone who managed it. I can talk about leadership, policies, reforms. But you are the reason they mattered." For the first time in a long while, Danielle was speechless. Her heart beat with equal parts pride and anxiety. "What do I even say?" she asked after a moment. "Just speak the truth," he replied. "That's always been your strength." She accepted the invitation, though the idea of speaking before an auditorium full of national leaders, educators, and scholars felt overwhelming. At night, she drafted outlines and practiced lines in front of her mirror. Her mother, now her most devoted supporter, sat quietly with her some evenings, helping her refine her words. "Tell them about the braid," her mother suggested one night. "Tell them what it meant." That was the moment everything changed. Danielle nodded slowly. "It was never about the hair," she whispered. "It was about what they thought they could take from me." By May, the school was preparing for final exams and graduation activities. But while other seniors focused on prom and college applications, Danielle's days were filled with forum prep, peer mentoring, and helping implement the new Voices of Respect program an elective course built around storytelling, anti-bullying education, and community building. One afternoon, as she prepared materials for the class, she found herself working side by side with someone she hadn't spoken to directly in months, Austin Rell. He had joined the class voluntarily, a quiet gesture of remorse that hadn't gone unnoticed. Since his probation began, Austin had changed in small, consistent ways. He no longer walked through the school with the confidence of someone untouchable. He participated in class with quiet sincerity, often listening more than speaking. "I guess I'm still trying to figure out who I am without all that," he admitted one day during a group reflection session, gesturing vaguely at the past he'd once clung to. Danielle nodded. "That's the first step," she said softly. "The real question is, who do you want to be now?" He didn't have an answer yet, but that was okay. Growth, she had learned, was messy and slow. Meanwhile, the stories from the Student Advocacy Council began attracting attention from nearby schools. Danielle received letters and emails from students across the state, asking how they could start something similar in their own communities. Some had never spoken up before. Others had tried and been ignored. One message stood out. It was from a girl named Naomi at Westfield High, who had been harassed for wearing her natural hair. "I read your story and cried," Naomi wrote. "You reminded me I'm not alone." Danielle printed the letter and pinned it to the council's board. "This," she said to her team, "is why we keep going." In late May, as preparations for the forum intensified, Principal Hughes invited Danielle to participate in a mock panel discussion in front of the Meadow Ridge staff. It was a rehearsal, but more than that, it was a chance for the faculty to understand what Danielle had carried, what she had overcome. She stood at the front of the auditorium, the same one where she had once delivered her first speech, and spoke without hesitation. "When I first walked into this school, I didn't expect perfection. I just wanted to be treated like I mattered," she began. "But I learned quickly that silence can be more damaging than open cruelty. And worse, that even good people, well-meaning people, can stand by and let harm happen if they're too afraid to speak up." Several teachers looked down, their expressions weighed with reflection. "But I also learned something else," Danielle continued. "That it only takes one voice to break the silence. And once the silence is broken, it's harder to go back." The room erupted in quiet applause. The night before she left for Chicago, Danielle placed the wooden box holding her braid into her suitcase. She wasn't sure if she'd use it in her talk. But she knew she wanted it with her. It had become more than a keepsake, it was a symbol of what she had survived and transformed. The conference was held in a grand hotel overlooking Lake Michigan. Danielle, dressed in a modest navy blazer and her mother's pearl earrings, sat beside Principal Hughes at the long table on stage, looking out at hundreds of educators from across the country. When it was her turn to speak, she stood, walked to the podium, and took a breath. She glanced at her notes once, then tucked them away. "I'm not here as a model student or a success story," she said. "I'm here as someone who was forced to find strength when everything around her said to stay silent. I'm here because my dignity was questioned, my identity was mocked, and my pain was ignored." She paused, then reached into her bag and gently placed the braid of hair on the podium. "This," she said, her voice clear, "is what they tried to take from me. But what they really tried to steal was my self-worth. And what I've learned is that no one, not classmates, not teachers, not even institutions, gets to decide your worth." The room was still. Some attendees wiped their eyes. Others leaned forward, hanging on every word. "I share this not because I want pity," she continued, "but because I believe we can do better. We must teach our students that strength is not about power, it's about compassion. And silence is not neutrality, it's complicity." After she finished, the audience gave her a standing ovation. Not out of politeness, but from genuine admiration. Later that evening, Danielle received invitations from multiple districts asking her to speak again. A publisher asked if she had considered writing a book. But what touched her most were the students who approached her, young, nervous, grateful. You changed how I see myself, one girl whispered. Back home, Meadow Ridge High welcomed her return with banners in the hallway reading, "Welcome home, Danielle." The council threw her a surprise gathering in the library, complete with cupcakes, handwritten notes, and a certificate of recognition from the school board. Principal Hughes presented it with a smile. "We don't usually give these to students," he said. "But then again, you're not just any student." As summer approached and graduation neared, Danielle walked the halls with a quiet sense of fulfillment. Not everything was perfect, no school could change overnight, but it was better. It was alive. And it was hers. On graduation day, she wore her cap and gown with pride. Her name was called last, on purpose, Principal Hughes had told her, because, sometimes, the final word makes the strongest impression. As she crossed the stage, she glanced out at the crowd, her mother, Principal Hughes, Tessa, Jamal, even Austin. And in that moment, she felt the weight of everything she had carried, then let it go. Because she had done what she came to do. She had spoken the truth. She had changed the system. And now, she was ready for what came next. The summer after graduation brought a new kind of quiet to Danielle Carter's life. The chaos of Meadow Ridge High, the tension of speaking engagements, and the non-stop whirlwind of reform work had finally given way to stillness. But with that silence came reflection. Danielle returned to her old neighborhood in Detroit for a few weeks, a place she hadn't seen in nearly 2 years. The cracked sidewalks and boarded-up storefronts stood in stark contrast to the polished hallways of Meadow Ridge, but to her, it still felt like home. Familiar faces greeted her on every corner, and more than a few neighbors stopped her to say, "We saw you on TV," or, "You did good, baby girl. Real good." At first, Danielle didn't know what to say. She smiled, nodded, and offered quiet thank yous, still getting used to being seen not as the quiet new girl, but as someone who had made a difference. But what moved her most was when young girls and boys came up to her, pointing at their hair or asking if she really stood up to bullies. Their eyes sparkled with possibility. That was when it hit her, this wasn't the end of her journey. One afternoon, while walking through her old community center, she ran into Ms. Keisha, a youth counselor who used to run the after-school programs. "Girl, I knew you'd come back," Keisha said, pulling Danielle into a tight hug. "You ready to build something here too?" Danielle blinked. "Build what?" "A real program," Keisha said. "One that teaches kids how to stand up, speak out, and protect each other. Lord knows they need it here more than ever. And you? You're the perfect one to lead it." It didn't take long for the idea to take root. Danielle partnered with Keisha, and by the end of July, they had drafted the blueprint for the RIC project: respect, integrity, strength, and empathy. It would be a youth empowerment initiative centered on storytelling, peer mentorship, conflict resolution, and restorative justice practices. With the help of a few local sponsors and the community center board, they secured a small grant and transformed an unused wing of the building into the Rise Room. Danielle painted the walls herself, along with a group of local teens, creating murals filled with affirmations: "You matter, your voice counts," and "Strength is not silence." The program officially launched in mid-August with 27 students ranging from age 12 to 17. The first few days were tough. Some kids came in angry, guarded, even defiant. Others were shy to the point of silence. But Danielle had seen it all before, and she knew exactly how to reach them. She began each session by sharing part of her story, not the polished version for conferences, but the raw truth, the braid, the humiliation, the rage she held back, and the moment she chose to rise instead of break. Slowly, the walls began to come down. One of the students, 14-year-old Malik, reminded Danielle of herself. He sat in the back, arms crossed, hoodie pulled tight, eyes always scanning the room like a cornered animal. For weeks, he barely spoke. But one day, after a session about emotional armor and the masks we wear to survive, Malik stayed behind. "You really got jumped like that?" he asked quietly. Danielle nodded. Yeah. And worse. But I'm still standing. And now I teach others how not to get pushed down. He didn't say anything else that day. But the next morning, he came back early and asked if he could help set up chairs. From then on, he never missed a session. Word about the RISE project spread fast. By September, they had 60 students and a waitlist. Local news outlets ran features about the program, and Danielle was invited to speak at city council meetings to discuss youth-led initiatives for public safety and anti-violence. But growth also brought challenges. One afternoon, Danielle returned to the center to find graffiti spray painted across the mural she had worked so hard on, "Rats" in large black letters, and beneath it, "Snitch culture dies." It shook her. Not because of the words, but because she knew what it meant. Someone from the neighborhood, or maybe even a former participant, had taken offense to the message of accountability the program promoted. It was a warning. Keisha found Danielle sitting in the RISE room that night, staring at the defaced wall. "You okay, baby?" Danielle looked up. "I thought we were making a difference. But what if we're just stirring up more hate?" Keisha shook her head. "You are making a difference. That's why it scares people who live off fear. Change doesn't come without pushback. You taught a whole school how to stand. You think this'll stop you?" Danielle got up the next morning at sunrise and repainted the wall. This time, she added a new line beneath the old affirmations: "You can't silence a story that's already been heard." As the fall went on, RISE introduced parent workshops, community dialogues, and art therapy programs. Danielle was now mentoring a group of older teens who helped facilitate the younger groups. Malik became one of them. During one session, a 6th grader broke down crying after being bullied at school. Malik put a hand on his shoulder and said, "You're not weak for crying, little man. You're strong for telling the truth." Danielle watched from the back of the room, her eyes misty. The cycle was breaking. The silence was breaking. In December, Danielle was invited back to Meadow Ridge High for a community panel on racial justice and educational reform. She almost declined. Going back felt strange, too many memories. But in the end, she went. The auditorium hadn't changed much, but the faces had. The same space where she once stood, trembling, now welcomed her with applause. Principal Hughes embraced her. "You changed the soul of this place. Never forget that." When she spoke, she didn't focus on her past. Instead, she spoke of the future. Real justice doesn't just come from exposing the problem. It comes from building something better afterward. That's what we're doing with RISE. That's what every student deserves. After the panel, a teacher approached her, eyes brimming with tears. "I didn't do enough back then. But I see you now. And I promise I'll do better." Danielle nodded. "That's all I ever wanted." As she walked through the halls one last time, students waved, nodded, smiled. She saw respect in their eyes, not just for her, but for what she represented. Not a victim. Not a survivor. But a builder. A leader. That night, back in Detroit, Danielle returned to the RISE room. The lights were dimmed, the murals bright and strong. On her desk was a folder from the mayor's office, a proposal to expand the program to 3 other neighborhoods, with Danielle at the helm. She sat down, Braid still tucked in a velvet-lined box on the shelf behind her, and smiled. This was never just about fighting back. It was about lifting others up. And Danielle Carter had only just begun. The following spring, Danielle stood on the steps of City Hall in downtown Detroit, flanked by 2 city council members and a banner that read, "RISE expands, a new era of youth empowerment." Cameras clicked as she delivered her speech to a crowd of journalists, educators, and families. But Danielle's voice was calm, focused, not on the headlines, but on the heart of the mission. "This isn't just a program," she said. "This is a promise to every child who feels unseen, every voice that's been silenced. We're not just creating safe spaces, we're creating a culture of strength through empathy. The mayor stepped forward next, announcing the official city partnership with Rise. 3 more centers would open by year's end in underserved neighborhoods across the city, each modeled after the blueprint Danielle had created. The initiative would include job training, emotional literacy, community service, and peer-led counseling. But with progress came weight. Danielle found herself juggling grant meetings, hiring staff, managing volunteers, and answering hundreds of emails. There were nights she barely slept, staring at the ceiling wondering if she was still connected to the kids or becoming another suit behind a desk. One Friday evening, she returned to the original Rise Center after a long day of meetings. The lights were dimmed, but laughter echoed from the art room. Curious, she peeked inside. Malik and a few of the older students were hosting a game night for the younger kids, complete with snacks, music, and hand-painted board games. No adult supervision. Just trust. Danielle leaned against the doorframe, smiling. That's what this was always about, empowerment that didn't depend on her presence, but lived on its own. Still, her impact was far from forgotten. In May, she received an invitation to be the keynote speaker at the National Conference on Education Reform in Washington, D.C. Her topic, From Silence to Strength, centering student voice in school culture. At the conference, Danielle stood in a massive ballroom filled with thousands of educators and policymakers. Behind her was a projection of her high school picture, the one taken just days after her hair was cut. In it, she stood with a stern expression and visible pain in her eyes. That girl, Danielle began, pointing to the screen, wasn't weak. She was in survival mode. She chose to endure. But we can't let our schools be places where survival is necessary. They must be places where students thrive. Her speech went viral, shared by national news outlets and reposted by advocacy groups across the country. Soon after, schools in other states reached out, hoping to replicate the Rise model. Danielle was invited to visit schools in Chicago, Philadelphia, and even rural districts in Kentucky. Each visit reminded her just how universal the struggle, and the hope, could be. But the most powerful moment came later that summer. Danielle returned to Meadow Ridge for a new ceremony, one she helped establish, the annual Day of Voices. It was a day dedicated to honoring students who had shown courage, kindness, and leadership in the face of adversity. This year, Malik had been selected to give the student address. Standing on the same stage where Danielle once delivered her defining speech, Malik looked out at the crowd and spoke clearly. Ms. Carter didn't just teach us how to be strong. She showed us that being strong isn't about staying silent. It's about using your story to protect others. That's what Rise gave me, a place to be heard. Danielle, sitting in the front row, wiped away tears. That evening, after the ceremony, Danielle returned to her childhood home for a quiet dinner with her mother, Danielle Carter. Over the years, their relationship had softened. The hard silences and guarded exchanges had given way to honest conversation and mutual respect. "I'm proud of you, baby," Tanya said, her voice rough with emotion. "You didn't just change your life. You changed ours." Danielle reached across the table and took her mother's hand. "We did it together. You always told me to walk with my head high, even when it was hard. I finally understand what you meant." As the sun set over the city, casting golden light through the kitchen window, Danielle felt something deep and steady inside her, peace, purpose, and the unshakable knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Her story had started with silence, shame, and injustice. But it had become a legacy, one built not on anger, but on action. Not on revenge, but on resilience. And in communities across the country, that legacy was just beginning to bloom.